Making wood go from this to this is actually a pretty simple process. But because this is a chemical reaction, there are some variables to consider that will affect your results, such as how much steel wool should you use? Or what about adding tannins to the wood with coffee or tea? And what effect does apple cider vinegar have? And how does this compare to a weathered wood stain you can just buy off the shelf, or say these aged wood accelerator products? You've also got to consider how certain finishes will affect the color. And what results will you get if you're using maple, birch, red oak, walnut, plywood, redwood, mahogany, or treated lumber? We're going to take all of these variables into account as we learn how to age wood in a matter of minutes. I'm Jeremy, and this is Gadgets and Grain. Now, one common variant to this recipe is to add tannins to the wood before you add the oxidation solution. One method can involve using black tea. Now, I use black tea because it is the darkest and it gives the wood the most tannins. Another method is actually applying coffee to the wood. And while we're trying different variants here, let's try apple cider vinegar, just to see if that makes a difference. Now let's try some off-the-shelf colors here, starting with this weathered gray stain from Varathane. Now, one thing that's new out there are these weathered wood accelerators, and these actually act very similar to the oxidation solutions in that they age the wood over a few minutes. Now let's see how they look. Now the last big variable in all this is how different finishes will affect the color of the stain. So I'm going to use a water-based polyurethane, an oil-based polyurethane, this marine spar finish that the good folks at Total Boat actually sent me for like an outdoor application, tung oil, and spray-on lacquer. For best results, you want to make sure you lightly sand the wood samples before applying the finish. So as you can see, there's lots of variables that affect the final result of this stain. And if you want to get the full recipe and see detailed photos of these results, you want to head over to gadgetsandgrain.com or follow the link in the description below. Now, I've actually done a video on this topic before, and one of the biggest questions I've received is, why doesn't my final result with this solution look like something you see in this video or something you see online? And it really comes down to the wood species you choose. As you saw with just the 3 samples we did, it can look pretty different. And if you get especially into these hardwoods, which we'll get to in a minute, you can see there's even more differences. So when you're going out and doing, like, say, a large scale project like a dining table or a bigger piece of furniture, make sure you're getting the same species of wood, and always test the stain out on some scrap pieces before you really dive into a project. Another big question I've gotten on this is, how can you affect the lightness or the darkness of the final product? That really comes down to how much steel wool you're using. And I've got this sample of Douglas fir here that I did some experiments on. The recipe we just covered in this video used half a bundle of steel wool. And so that's the darkness you're gonna get right here. It's pretty dark, you know? And I know that Douglas fir gives you more of that black gray finish, whereas like hemlock fir and yellow pine is more of a dirty brown. But as we kind of back off on the steel wool, you can see like a fourth of a bundle here, it gets a little lighter, and then like an eighth of a bundle gets even lighter. And here's the original color of the wood right there. So you want to play around with how much steel wool you're using and see what your desired effect is. Another question you might ask yourself with this particular recipe is, do you have to boil the vinegar? And I think it's really convenient to do it because it gives you a solution you can use in like an hour versus, say, a couple days. And I experimented with this. So what I did here is I took some steel wool solution that I boiled the vinegar on, and after just an hour here, I've got it this dark already. After a couple hours, and so on, and here's all the way to like 48 hours. You can see the solution doesn't really get too much darker. So it's kind of ready to go after an hour over here. Now, without boiling the vinegar, I'll compare these guys. You can see that here's the original color of this Douglas fir here. It's not too dark, and it does take a couple days to get that nice dark finish. So you can cheat by boiling that vinegar, and it'll get you a solution that you can use much quicker. And while we're talking about the vinegar, a lot of questions I get are around the smell of the solution. When you do this, does your wood always smell like vinegar? And the answer is no. Especially when you apply a finish on top of this, it's gonna seal it all in. You're never gonna smell the vinegar again. Don't worry about it. But on that note too, I would really recommend trying to boil this outside if you can, or just expect your house to kind of smell like vinegar for a little bit. And if you're gonna let it sit and steep, like, go let the solution sit outside. So yeah, boil your vinegar in the house if you have to, and then go let this solution sit outside to release the hydrogen and kind of produce itself. Is adding coffee and tea really necessary? Well, it kind of depends on the wood species you're dealing with. When you get to something like, say, yellow pine, it does help to add the tannins to the wood because it's a pretty light wood to begin with. And, you know, it just depends on what you're looking for. Play around with it. Add some coffee, add some tea, see if you get a better effect on top of using the steel wool solution. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary. It depends on the wood species you're using. And that's another question I get too, is should you apply the coffee and tea first and then the steel wool solution? Does it matter which one you do? So I tested it myself here on this piece of white pine. Here's with the tea first and then the steel wool solution, and here's with the steel wool solution then the tea. It is pretty much identical. You can see there, not really a lot of difference, so I don't think it really matters. I just like getting the tea and coffee part out done first and then adding the steel wool solution. And finally, before we look at these other species of wood, is it kind of about a safety. So someone might ask, should I seal the lid on my solution while the steel wool is in there and it's oxidizing basically? And you should not leave the lid on there while you're leaving steel wool in there. And the reason is, when vinegar and steel wool interact, they release hydrogen. And you want to make sure that that hydrogen can escape, and that's why I recommend you let this sit outside while it, oxidizes. Then if you remove the steel wool from here, there's no more reactioning happening in here, and then you can seal your solution. But yeah, just for safety's sake, do not seal the lid on it while you've got steel wool. So let's take a look at how these other species turned out. I didn't use as many permutations as I did in the previous wood samples, so you're not going to see as many blocks of wood here. I just tried to keep things simple. But yeah, I used some common hardwoods you might use. I've also taken a lot of questions you've left in my previous video about this, and I thought let's just test them out and see how this solution looks. Before we wrap things up here, I want to thank the folks over at Total Boat for sending me some free samples here, this stuff that I could try out. They were really cool enough to kind of be part of this, so I wanted to just give them a shout out for that. Really appreciate that. All right, so maybe you saw a color in there that you really liked and a wood that you really want to use in a project you're working on. So yeah, in the end, if there's a species you want to try or something you haven't seen in this video, just test it out. Make a little bit of solution in a little jar like this and just see how it looks. And hey, if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, and if you want, go over to gadgetsandgrain.com and hit those Amazon links over there. They are affiliate links, so when you do your shopping on Amazon, it does help out my channel. I would really appreciate it. And for now, I've got to figure out what to do with all these little wood squares that I now have from this experiment. I literally have like 500 wood squares that I don't know what to do with. So if you have any ideas, let me know. All right, see you later.